Thank you very much, Kelly. Hi, good morning, evening to everyone, wherever you are. Thanks for joining. I'm not sure if we have all speakers at the moment. I see definitely David, Professor Dieng and Bodil are there. So I'll just start. We have an hour and a half. Thank you for the participants to join. So as Kelly mentioned, we'll talk about militarism and environmental justice, the impact of militarism on environmental justice, and more broadly, which one is broader is also an open question, about a peace-oriented security policy. What can be such a green policy to achieve a demilitarized world? So before that, I'll present the participants very briefly, because all the information is on the Global Greens website and on the Facebook page. First, I'll start with Bodil. Bodil Valero is Swedish. She's a member of the European Parliament. She's been rapporteur for the European Parliament on arms export control. She's been working for long on security and migration issues. I think both the European angle and the Swedish angle will be very interesting in terms of security questions and what other questions it begs in terms of environmental impacts. But also other forms of impact, and she can maybe tell us a bit more about the position of the group of the Greens in the European Parliament on the global strategy of the EU and its defense strategy. Then we have Professor Meissa Dieng from Senegal. Hi. Who is joining us, I guess, from right now being in Senegal. Thanks for the input. You have all sent me a very brief input of what you wanted to talk about. So you will definitely cover the region, the ECOWAS region, and Senegal, but also in what you sent me. Very interesting topics on the colonial and imperial legacies and the differentiated but shared responsibility principle that applies also to the questions of security. The historical traces and impacts of military interventions that I think is also a very important topic. And then you touched on issues. We'll talk about that later, but I think are very interesting in terms of environmental activism being a springboard, maybe to fight militarism, and the question also of green jobs. So thanks for that. Next in line is Professor David Schwartzman from the US. Hi, David. Thanks for joining. I don't see any of you speakers on the camera, but hi. David is a member of the Green Party, United States, and Professor Emeritus of biogeochemistry, sorry for that, and environmental science at Howard University. Also creator and manager of the Solar Utopia website, together with your son, if I read correctly. And you are running for the DC Council as candidate, right, for the Green Party. Thanks for joining. I have gone through your documents and points. Very interesting, obviously. And as Kelly mentioned, you are the originator also of this webinar idea. Definitely very interesting to talk about the military-industrial complex, because this is a very profound and underlying cause of environmental threats and definitely of the climate change situation we are finding ourselves in. So I'll let you tell us more about that, and you will cover the region, but also US policies in that regard. I'll for sure ask you at some point to talk about a point you mentioned on space exploration and military, which I think is an important one and not talked about enough, certainly within green circles, for what I know. And last participant is the president of the Green Party in Pakistan and representative of the Asia Pacific Green Federation of the Global Global Greens, Liaquat Ali Sheikh, whom I don't know if we have online. Just looking at the chat box.
Liaquat's not yet here.
Okay.
I'll let you know when he arrives.
Yeah. All right. All right. I'll just take a few minutes to present the Green European Journal, which I'm the editor-in-chief of, and very quickly set the scene in terms of what we want to talk about. If that's fine with all of you, with the three of you, David, Bodil, and Professor Dieng. Yeah. All right. So I'm the editor-in-chief of the Green European Journal. This is an editorially independent journal, so it's not a party journal. It is part of the Green European family, more broadly of the Green family globally. We produce thematic editions, which are both on hard copies, so paper copies, and online. You will find them on our website. I think Kelly has shared with you a series of links I have sent that delve into the security topic, but also topics that are connected to the security topic in terms of environment and climate. I strongly encourage you to go back to our edition on security, which is very much in line with what we're going to discuss today, which is trying to take a holistic perspective at the security question. And the Green European Journal and its editorial board always try to complement the Green European family in coming up with sort of taboo topics or topics that are not necessarily the ones that the electorate or any other audience do associate with the Greens, which is very sadly so, because I think we have a lot to say, and I think tackling the security question in a more holistic perspective is what we'll talk about today. So we have an online website which covers more current topics and other kinds of news. They go from environment to technopolitics, security questions. We've had a recent edition on the future of work. So we cover all sorts of topics, and we have started with the help of Kelly and some of you a very interesting series of Beyond Europe, so to say, series of interviews in order to question the Greens outside of Europe. Also because we do feel that, of course, the Greens are very well established in Europe. They're historically the strongest force around the globe among the Green family. But that doesn't mean others don't have stuff to teach to the European Greens. They know that, but it's not always been part of the publications and thinking in European Greens. So I think it's very exciting project. So you'll hear more about us. We've just published a piece about South Korean Greens with Kim Hwan, which is online, talking about security, of course, given the region, but issues such as basic income, feminism, and welfare states. So you're welcome to go and have a look, and we'll come to your country or region in the months to come. So that's it. I close it there for the Green European Journal. Happy to answer questions, and you can write to me or to the team, or even through Kelly if you want to know more or receive more information. So today the goal is really to talk about the impact of militarism on environmental justice and what it means for the Greens to be able to shape a peace-oriented security policy that short-term, long-term, but definitely long-term aims at achieving a demilitarization of our current world. I think before we go into the presentations of each of the speaker and what they have to say about their region and what they've been working on, I just wanted very quickly to brush a picture. I mean, that's I'm not an expert. You are the experts. So as a journalist, it's just very interesting when we thought about security becoming more and more of a pregnant, urgent topic in Europe, to see that the security question and the military question have been changing over time in the last decades, and in a very sometimes pernicious and pervasive way. The privatization of security has been one of the trends ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and certainly 9/11 attacks. We see a new security course that has emerged and being pushed by Western, I mean North Atlantic mainly, but Western industrialized countries. And the military and the defense question have been a tricky one for many progressives and left parties, because of course they are all peace-oriented, but not all of them have been anti-military in a very clear way, not anti-interventionist. So I think there the question of what is the place of military in our society, what it is used for, and the place of interventionism as the just use of force is something that we will be able to discuss, but it's something that has been changing over time. I think that among the Greens in the last 3 decades, having studied, at least for myself, for long the history of the Greens in Europe, not at the global level, I must say. Definitely, we see a very interesting history of changes, variations, and developments, with some being more clearly okay with the use of force, and with the military being obviously in favor of civilian missions and civic protection. But I think the stance of the different Green parties have been changing, and I think that's also an interesting dialogue to have here, and to see how, as global Greens, we continue to talk to each other and enrich each other with the experience we have in our different parts of the world. I'm not going therefore on the other trends, but I think they're very important because they've been talked about a lot, and they've been very much at the core of the security discourse in the last years. Cybersecurity and the question of biological weapons, and in Europe also the question of border control, but we've seen it in many places. These are topics that have been melted in the mainstream discourse to talk about security and justify sometimes the use or the revival of the military question. Very clearly, and we've seen it in the last days with President Trump at the UN. The question of the post-World War II world order, and the place of the UN and the place of multilateralism is a very, very important question today. I mean, it will be reshaping and redefining security questions around the world. The security situations in different parts of the world have very much changed. I mean, there's a whole academic literature on that, and I'm thinking especially of the work done by Mary Kaldor at the LSE in London, with whom we have worked, who's basically saying that new wars and new conflicts have nothing to do with the ones of the 20th century. And there also the military and the defense industry has been very much pushing a new discourse there. And in those cases, there has been a very clear link with environmental and climate impacts. I think also, and this draws on what Professor Dieng sent me the other day as an input, I think there also there will be a question of whether the new forms of power and the new forms of democracy, and I'm not thinking only about social media, but of some movements, and obviously looking to the environmental justice movement, whether the 21st century can be the one where, you know, we have all knowledge and historical knowledge of what are the legacies, and whether we can turn that into a strength and a force for the environmental justice movements against militarism. I'll stop there. Just wanted to mention a few points that are, I believe, important in the context of such a broad discussion. In an hour and a half, and by now less, obviously, we'll not have the time to cover everything. But I think it's important that we have those in mind. So, without further ado, I would like to ask each of the participants, starting with Bodil, to talk about what is their stance, their personal and political stance on that very broad question. And Bodil, you have tackled it in many different ways, at least for the work at the Parliament, which is your work I know best. So the impact of militarism on environmental justice and how, and that's the second part of the question where I guess you will jump in even more strongly. How can Greens use a peace-oriented security policy to achieve demilitarization? So if you can talk about your personal and political stance on the question, and as I have written to you, I would like all of you to take 6-7 minutes and also talk about what you do in your region, in your case, Sweden, which is a very peculiar country in Europe in that regard, and very interesting. And obviously the EU, given that you are a member of the European Parliament. Bodil, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that introduction and so on. I think that we, as we are now together, all of us from 4 continents, I think we should remember now and then also our global charter and our common goals. And the global charter has also part on peace and security, and I find it very, very good. And that is also what I'm working with when I in my work in the Parliament on peace and security. I can always go back to the global charter and to our other documents, of course, but the global charter, the last one is from 2017, some small changes, but I don't think there were any changes in the peace and security. So I believe we didn't want to change anything as global Greens, and it's very good base to work on from that one. The starting point is that we support peace. It's not only absence of war. We have a much broader picture of what leads to conflict and what could be done. We want to regulate and we want to reduce the international arms trade. We would like to eliminate it in the long run. The only thing I'm missing that we maybe would have wanted to have in is the lethal autonomous weapons. But that discussion was not as vivid last year as when we had the meeting in Liverpool. But I wanted to also to start with, where are we now in Europe? Because in the Parliament, there's so many things going on, and it has been for several years now. It's not only because of the wars in our neighborhood. It started already in a defense minister meeting in 2013, when after the financial crisis, we needed to create jobs or at least not lose them. And the defense industry, they have a lot of people working there. And some of the conclusions from the minister, also the council, the European Council Minister meeting was really a lot of support for the defense industry. And from there, we have been everything has gone in a special direction. But what is also, I think that citizens, the perception of security has become very, very imperative, because we have wars in our neighborhood. We have had terrorist attacks also in our own countries. We have Russia back on the scene, and they were rather quiet for a couple of years. And then we have Trump, and we don't know exactly, or we don't know anything of what we can expect from him, really. And then suddenly we have also a lot of migrants, and that has led to some kind of crisis on values in the European Union, and also the aim for closing the doors for these migrants because they could be possibly terrorists in the long run. So this is where we are in this moment, and what are the EU responses? I would say we have had a lot of very quick fixes responses during these years. that I have been in Parliament, and it's a quick fixes because the European Union wants to show that we take people seriously. If they feel threatened, we should give answers so they can really feel that EU is doing something. We want to show them we are here and we listen to you. So we close borders, we rearm the member states. We try to, they are, it's not a union competence, but we try to make them rearm. We talk about a common army, we have started a defense fund, we talk about defense union, and we all put different meanings in what is the defense union. And it's not clear at all. And we talk about strategic autonomy. That is something that we Greens, we really do not want to see on the scene, because it means really that we could do everything we want to, if that's strategic. But others say it's something else. We talk very much about there is some kind of competition with the NATO, and all the time forgetting that some of the countries, we are not even member states in the NATO. So that is something I have to focus all the time, or reiterate that, yes, you have, okay, this is it's the union competence, this is what NATO does. Territorial defense, that is something for them. We have not that competence in the European Union, so that is not for us. And then in the Parliament, I could really say we have all these different voices heard in this Parliament. Some of them are really, or very, very much in favor of the common army, defense union, and so on, and some totally the contrary. And in the Greens, what is the situation in the Greens? We are in the same situation, of course. We are politicians. We want to be re-elected. We want to listen to our citizens. And when the citizens' preoccupation is about, oh, Russians, they are coming again, or they are in the neighborhood, then we have to have a response to that. And as a politician, it's also easy to try to, yes, that is maybe we cannot. If we talk as we always have done, we are pacifists and so on, they don't take us seriously. They see us as lunatics, and that's very common. When I speak as a Green, many times it's looked upon as if I was a strange, an alien or something like that. So we have to find the responses in a proper way, so we can meet these preoccupation without leaving what is written in the charter, in our common charter. And I think we managed to do that rather well. But we are also divided in the group. We have to know that. Because we are not only Greens, we have also a lot of independent members in the Green and EFA group. And then we have EFA, those are the regionalists. They don't come from the Green movement, but they are in our group, and we take decisions together. So sometimes the decisions, they are not as Greens as I would like to see them, really. We can also see that in the Green family, we have people or Greens coming from the Baltic states, from the Eastern states, or East European states, and they have Russia very, very close in mind, especially the Baltics, because they have also their minorities, the Russian-speaking minorities, and they know that the Russians, if something happened with the minorities there, they could intervene. So they have another view on how to solve this question. Normally we get along, but not always. I have to say that. And my way of working in this is that I try to shift the focus, and I try to make us talk more about what's human security, and which are the real threats to our security or to humans in our member states and in the world. And and of course the most relevant threats are not military. We don't believe that the Russians will come and invade Sweden or the European Union, some of these states. We don't believe that. So that is not the main threat. So which are the main threats? And if we look on the broader picture, main threats are climate change, extreme weathers, the cyber threats. We have to look upon this secures the water supply, food sovereignty or food supply. We have to look at infrastructure that could be damaged with an extreme weather, etc. And those are the real threats. And how can we keep this in mind when we also know that we have this defense industry and all these proposals to strengthen the defense industry and so on, and also the economy around it? Well, what I try to do always is to say that yes, it's very good that we have this very highly skilled competence in the defense industry, because we need them. We need their competence to a lot of other things that really to defend us against all those other threats. And once when I spoke to a man in the defense industry, and he said, yes, because you have asked us to build planes, so we build planes. If you ask us to build trains, we will build trains, and if you want something else, we will do it. So I think that we can talk about the conversion of the defense industry to something that we really need against the real threats that we face in society. And in the beginning, when I started to speak about that in Sweden, it was the normal reaction: you're a lunatic, you're a strange person. But it takes some time before it gets into the mind of people that yes, it's good. We have a very highly skilled people there working and so on. So because otherwise you will always say, no, we lose a lot of jobs. Then we also talk, now I come a bit on the way over to Sweden, because as you said, it's rather special. And like I said, we have for many years already had as one of the main reasons for or main grounds for security in Sweden is democracy, rule of law, the institutions, and human security. And one of the main threats we have seen as climate change. So this is very, very based in the Swedish security policy thinking. And we have also divided in the parliament, because normally the security is in defense committee, but we don't have security in defense committee. We have it in foreign affairs committee. Because if it's in defense committee, security will be looked upon only from the military perspective and not from all of the other ones. So I think that is strategically very good to divide that, to have security in foreign affairs and not in defense. But then we also have, for example, now in Sweden we had very, very big fires, and many times we don't have very many militaries in Sweden, because nobody wants to be military, so they're rather few. But then we have a lot of voluntaries, military or reservists, I think they call it in English. And so if something happens, they can go out and do a lot of things. If in wartime, but it could also be when we have a big fire. And there are some difficulties still to make this happen, so we can use them in those extreme weathers. They want to do it, and normally the question is, who is going to pay? Is it the municipality, or is it the state, or is it someone else? So we have a lot to work on there. Sweden, as you know, it's a country we haven't had wars for 200 years, and I think that we are a good example, and that others also could try to do as we have done, with trying really to avoid wars instead of starting them and so on. I don't know if I have more time, but I would like to say something about the arms trade. Is it okay?
Yeah, very briefly, please.
Yeah. That is also something that we have been working on very much here in the parliament. We started already in Sweden to create a more stricter legislation. In reality, it's forbidden to sell arms or export arms in Sweden, unless it's not like that and so on. But now it's stricter than ever. It was already stricter than a common position that is binding for all of us. And we see that the countries, they are not living up to the common position, the member states. What we have done here is to really get the parliament behind us to support a stricter legislation or a stricter application of this common position, and also to introduce democracy criteria for the export of arms, just as we have done in Sweden. I leave it there because I've been speaking a long time.
Yeah. No worries. But yeah, you mentioned already a lot of things, and we can pick up some of the topics. I think over the summer, the military used, if I'm not mistaken, jets to bomb forest in Sweden in order to fight forest fire. So on the use of the military, I mean, some of the topics you mentioned, the reconversion of the military and defense industry into green jobs is something that was mentioned by Professor Dieng, to whom I give the floor in a minute. So I think indeed this shift in the narrative to human security and trying to avoid the defense discourse is very interesting. So we'll get back to you during the discussion. Thanks a lot, Bodil.
Okay.
Professor Dieng? Still with us?
Yes.
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 You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I have to say hello to everybody. And I will think in French, and I will try to respect the 7 minutes and see how to answer to the question, militarism and capitalism on environmental justice. First, I have to delimitate, I have to give to the audience the way I try to answer to this question. In our academic proposal, we used to use a method to answer to questions. I am from the School of Law, and we have two parts to answer to a question. The first one will be, why a militarist word? Why is this word militarist? The second point is how to achieve a demilitarized world through peace-oriented green security policy. First of all, we have to compare time of policy and time of social change. We are politics, and we need a social change. Did the two times, fit correctly given to the two perspectives? When we talk about militarization, we need to talk about geopolitics. And talking about geopolitics in our time means talking about what they call geoeconomy. Because as you mentioned it, militarism and capitalism are always going together. So for the first step of my answer, why a militarist world? We have the causes of the militarist world and the consequences. The causes, we think, in our green perspective and green understanding of the world, the causes of militarism is what we call extractivism. Extractivism historically go with militarization. We'll come back why militarization is what you call privatization of security. So the capitalism used militarization for colonial conquests and all sort of what we call grabbing on land, grabbing on resources, and so on. So those who invest own the world's largest firm, profit, and extract resources without the willingness of population. First one. The rest of the world has not willingly volunteered the resources to the richest countries. This is what we can call an asymmetry. An asymmetry. You are in a country where you are not welcome, but to get the resources, you have to use force. What are the consequences? The consequences is when those firms, those multinational firms are in our countries, what happens? They need compromission with politics. And this compromission is coming from the two elites, elites of the North and elite of the South. So those two political elites may compromise. And this compromission is a kind of legitimacy for those multinational firms with the military, company to put hands on our resources. That's the consequence. And shortly, I give you the shame of the situation of how they use extractivism of resources and how this extractivism is politically, protected. So to go quick and respect the 7 minutes, how to achieve demilitarization, so peace-oriented green policy. The first question, here I have 3 questions. The first one will be, what mean demilitarization of the world? What that mean? And how to demilitarize through peace-oriented green society, green policy. And the last point of this second approach is, what will be the environmental cost of militarization and how to repair it? So that's at this point that we need green advocacy. What means demilitarization of the world? We have problem. We have problem, environmental problem, coming from military activities. And this need to be urgently highlighted. By this way, demilitarization movement must bring its critics of corporate resource hegemony, I mean imperialism and colonialism, in supporting what we call environmental justice. And supporting this environmental justice means efforts green parties need to put to accompany communities in their self-determination to get back their right on the resources. And how to demilitarize through peace-oriented green security politics. In 2014, I wrote somewhere that Bellamy Foster and Anna Hollands put forward some elements necessary for theory of ecological imperialism. What does that mean, this theory of ecological imperialism? That means that, in my understanding, we need to develop a theory of anti-globalization. And this theory of anti-globalization for we green need to develop a new green policy. And what this new green policy will be, I think that the task of green parties and green ideology to understand the legacy and persistence of reality from ecological and imperialism perspective. And this concept, this situation, bring us to ask the question, who will pay for this cleaning, this environmental cleaning up? Who will pay? Because if I remember, I met years ago some academics from Libya who were making research on weapons left by Italians in Libya. I imagine this process was stopped by what happened in Libya. And military use of weapon, classic weapon, on some area of the world suppose that we need to clean up some part of this world. Who will pay this cleaning up? And to further the reflection, we will have to analyze the present responsibility for continuing harm done by the past and question a main big point. This point is reparation and restitution and reordering the society. By this point, reordering the society, we had in Marrakesh, before this climate change conference, we had a session convened by the Royal Academy of Morocco on the topic they call time of politics and time of climate. Are the two time of politics and time of climate can fit together? To explain this perspective, we politics, we need time to implement our program. Is the time we need to implement our program and to win the next election can fit with the time need to tackle serious problem causes here, for example, by climate change. Can we have this time doing politics and trying to renew the new model we need to solve all environmental issues? That brings me to end my purpose and say that we know that militarization is going with capitalism. And right now, considering the whole global situation, we know that the dominant model is the capitalism, the liberal model. And this liberal model will have and continue to use military force in another subtle way. The military will not use a classic weapon, new weapon, like experimentation of herbs, how we can use, Star Wars, yes, how we can use Star Wars and how we can use, new technology, not using man and classic weapon to achieve, destruction of part of the planet. So what will be the ideology and the model we Green will propose as an alternative and bring a new consideration of humanity in our relations? So I can stop here if you want, but I consider that I talk less than my precedent, colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dieng. Yeah, and we'll get back to most of the points you mentioned. In order to make sure we have time for discussion, I'll give the word right now to David, and yeah, I'll ask questions later. David.
Yes, I want to thank the organizers for this great opportunity. And please, Laurent, let me know when I have 6 minutes and give me warning, because I want to keep to the time. I want to begin by, first of all, talking about my party, the Green Party of the United States, and what their position is. So we have 4 pillars. We call it the 4 pillars of peace, ecology, social justice, and democracy. And then we have 10 key values. And number 4 of the key values is nonviolence. And I'll just read a description. It is essential that we develop effective alternatives to society's current patterns of violence. We will work to demilitarize and eliminate weapons of mass destruction without being naive about the intentions of other governments. We recognize the need for self-defense and defense of others who are in danger. We promote nonviolent methods to oppose practices and policies with which we disagree, and will guide our actions to lasting personal, community, and global peace. I invite people who are interested to go on to the Green Party of the United States website to see our full platform and foreign policy and so on. But I just want to mention one of the applications of this principle of nonviolence, and the Green Party of the United States, and I know this is controversial among some Green parties in the world, but our party supports the campaign which started in 2000, initiated in 2004 by Palestinian civil society, and that is called Boycott, Divest, and Sanction Israel. We support that, and I personally do, and I actually have a plank in my platform running for DC Council, and that is to cut police ties to Israel, which is a program which the Israeli security has for police departments all across the United States. So now I will turn to my theses, and I'll say this very succinctly, and then hopefully elaborate a bit during the discussion. And I'm a retired from Howard University, but I'm very active in scientific research and also as an eco-socialist in this particular field. And I'll hold up my book with my oldest son, Peter, and this is on our webinar Facebook page. So I invite people to purchase the ebook, which is the cheapest. Nevertheless, here's my key points. Oh, I didn't hear. The number one, President Eisenhower, some 60 years ago, pointed to the danger of the military-industrial complex. I've re-described it, and it's much bigger now, as the military-industrial fossil fuel nuclear state terror and surveillance complex. And for short, let's call it the MIC. I see this as the biggest threat to the future of humanity and the biodiversity on our planet. Number two, the MIC is the biggest single obstacle in preventing catastrophic climate change. And let's simply define catastrophic climate change as going beyond the goal that came out due to the global south of keeping the warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade, and recognizing the horrors already of climate change we already witnessed, but it'll get much worse if we don't keep below this bound. So it is central, the MIC is central to global capital reproduction in the world, colossal waste of energy and material resources, and very critically, it has a dominant role in setting the domestic and foreign policy agenda, not only of the United States, but virtually all the big capitalist powers. And here's a very important point that often is not recognized. The imperial agenda blocks global cooperation and equity required to prevent catastrophic climate change. And therefore, a global struggle for demilitarization as a component of the struggle against the imperial agenda, dissolving the MIC in a process of conversion to an economy serving humans and nature is critical in preventing catastrophic climate change. And a big bonus, we'd have a world finally at peace. And just a point about how this is actually expressed in our Green Party's political program. our presidential candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, in 2016, and actually before, and we have other candidates as well that have promoted this program, and it's called a Green New Deal. A Green New Deal. And I was very privileged to have organized a panel at the Degrowth Conference in the wonderful city of Malmö, Sweden. And we had two speakers, one from Germany, the other from Sweden, to talk about this approach. So I would submit we need a global Green New Deal. A global Green New Deal to accelerate the building of clean energy, particularly in the global south, which suffers severely from energy poverty, and to actually confront the challenges that we see in terms of the neoliberal economic policies, unemployment, particularly of youth, and so on. This is a critically important approach. And I know Yanis Varoufakis has written very well about this for Europe and many others. And of course, the UN has pioneered in this approach. So those how much time do I have left? Okay, I just want to close a bit with answering a couple of questions.
Take another 2-3 minutes, please.
Oh, thank you. And Laurent put these excellent questions out to us. So what is the possible ways to make security and environmental justice meet? Well, again, the biggest challenge in environmental justice in the world is to prevent climate catastrophe, I would submit. Now, there are many other, of course, environmental justice issues that are linked to this, and very strongly. For instance, it's a recent study found that almost 9 million people die every year from air pollution, which is driven by the burning of fossil fuel, which of course is linked to carbon emissions to the atmosphere, which is driving us to climate catastrophe, and also the lack of clean energy as well. So these links are very important, I think, in a political way, and of course, in many ramifications to address the challenge of climate change. We need to address air pollution and its health effect. For instance, in Washington, D.C., we have a childhood asthma epidemic, and we have high levels of air pollution from transportation. So the links are multifold. And I think at this point, I think I've used up my time. So I look forward to, by the way, I just want to mention that our previous speaker made a very important point about extractivism. And it's clear that if the Middle East was a main export was broccoli, we wouldn't have instead of oil, we wouldn't have the perpetual wars that are going on. So I thank our Mr. Dieng for making that critically important point. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David, Professor Schwartzman. I just turned quickly to Kelly to see if our last speaker has joined.
No, Leocat, I couldn't reach him, so he won't be joining us today.
Okay. So we'll. So then we can go into a discussion, and we have a bit more time, and I'll be happy for others who are listening to this, participating in this webinar, to jump in and have questions. I think from my side as a moderator, I mean, there are a few things that have emerged from your three interventions, and I think there are some very interesting connecting the dots sort of patterns that I see. Indeed, as I have mentioned at the beginning, there are different trajectories within the Greens in Europe, but also in other regions of the world as to what is their stance and what has been also their position towards the military and the defense industry. That having said that, you always have to look at it from a movement versus party, and especially party in power perspective. Once a party is in power at whatever level, it does, and that's at the very core of our democratic ideal as Greens, it does have to enter in dialogue with other forces, and therefore there's a certain level of consensus that we need. Just a second, I think I've lost you. Okay, sorry. So I wanted to ask the three of you, so there's no particular order I want you to respect, but I wanted to ask you especially on the reconversion of the defense industry in the link to what many Greens and in Europe it has been a driving force for some of the European Greens. We just had a conference on it. What they call post-growth, whether you call it degrowth or post-growth, but certainly if you think about capitalist economy being driven by growth and the need for economic growth, looking beyond growth for a greener society and one that is not obsessed with economic growth, which has been very much driven also by the defense industry. Can we, if we think about this nexus, post-growth, and the need to reconvert the defense industry, because as Bodil said, I mean, the reality on the ground is also that we have there very talented people. We have a lot of technical skills, and there's no objective reason that cannot be used towards the realization of greener jobs. And once that aim at taking climate change as the main security challenge, so talking about the human security angle that Bodil mentioned at the beginning, and talking about the green jobs and the reconversion of the extractivist industry that Professor Dieng mentioned. So I don't know if you want to react on that, any of you. Do we have there for the three speakers at the moment before we go to all of you? But if you have something to say on that, in the sense of the dialogue at the global Greens level, could be one that around human security and pursuing a post-growth world or going beyond growth could be a way to answer the problem of militarism. Any of you, Professor Dieng, Schwartzman, or Ms. Valero?
Yes, if I can.
Yes, please.
Okay, but let me focus on what Professor Dieng said, this new economy. Can we really say liberalism can be renewed? Liberalism is a philosophy, is an economical philosophy, and by the way, based on profit and access to resources. So what can we consider all around the world? If you say that looking beyond growth can't be separate to the objective of liberalism. Croissance, growth for what? Right now, you in Western society, you know that you reach the limit of what you call growth. And by reaching this limit, there is a new soft and clean industry development. You have new clean technology, you develop new clean technology. But the use of this new clean technology is limited to the Western society. And on the other side of the South, Western society are continuing to implement the classic model of liberalism. That what we have with this military intervention in Africa, led by France in former French colony. They are still French colony. And what's shocking is that the name used by this French military intervention, every time there is a French military intervention, they use a name of a wildlife animal. They intervene in Ivory Coast and they name this intervention Lincoln intervention. You know what the Lincoln is? The Lincoln is the only animal which can kill an elephant. The Lincoln is one animal with, with this big corn. And the name they gave to this French intervention in Ivory Coast. They go to RCA, they go to Central Republic of Africa, RCA, and they use the name of Sangaris. Sangaris is a butterfly. And this butterfly, scratch you on your skin. And so the mission of this Sankari, French military, is to divide population in RCA. And they came and right now in Mali, they use what they call serval military intervention in Mali. What serval is? Serval is an animal too, pesting all around, all around its surrounding neighborhood, delimiting is, you see how subtle and violent is this new form of intervention in Africa. But what we have to consider is this reconversion of military industry is not on the table in Africa. Maybe it's on the table in the Western society, but what we globally should think is how to put and bring, we green, equality in considering the new model we propose to the world. Is this new model based in what, I may be wrong, what Professor David brilliantly, called new liberal economic policy, or which new form of ecological democracy? And this, we need it because we knew that if there was no complicity between our leaders and Western leaders, the shame should be very easy. You European, you have this new soft, clean technology, not based on carbon energy. You develop it. You have all the industry developed already. How to transfer it and make us, has a shortcut development process on a clean way that need a very high level of equity and ethics in policy. I think that we, green in Africa, we should focus our reflection and our green philosophy action on that, and not, managing administrative, affairs. That's my point for now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I see David and Bodil had unmute, so I don't know. Bodil, you want to react?
Yes, I can react. Yeah. First on your question there, because when we talk about growth, and that is, I spoke before, I said we have to find the language that we can communicate to people around us. And when it's come to growth, yeah, we can communicate with the voters and so on, but for the other political parties, it's really difficult because it's the same. They just call us lunatics and you don't know anything and you don't understand and so on. We try in some way to change all the time these wordings and try to talk about development, because that is what we want. We want development. We don't want the growth as such. We want development. We want development for our citizens, for the citizens in Africa, for people everywhere. And we want that development to be in the frame of what the planet can give. Yeah? So the continuous growth is not possible in the way we interpret normally the word growth, as I see it anyway. So that is more or less the question, because post growth, we have a lot of growth, but we always talk about economic growth only. But growth, we used to say in Sweden that the only real growth we have is the forest, because it's growing every year. We have more and more. But otherwise, I think we have to shift the focus, and we have to put another language on things.
But I guess also part of my question, I mean, the whole work on post-growth and degrowth is ongoing. I mean, I think the conference in the European Parliament recently showed that there is, at least in Europe, also among mainstream forces, a sort of recognition of what Professor Dieng mentioned. I mean, we knew it for long, the limits to growth, but there is a sort of recognition, so there's a possibility to talk to other parties. What I guess I was referring to here in a more pragmatic ways, you, especially Professor Dieng and yourself, Bodil, talked about the reconversion and green jobs, and so I guess I was referring to the possibility, and that is a question, of using that language around human security and climate change to see that the real threat is there, and therefore that the reconversion, because it is existing, we cannot live in a closed world or dream of the defense industry and the whole infrastructural world we have there in the defense industry, all suppliers, workers, and so on. Whether this is something, and for example, among European Greens, you are discussing as the reconversion of the defense industry under that human security and climate change is our main threat type of discourse.
If I just
please.
This question on reconversion, I think it's more me talking about it. There are others also, of course, but also I believe as we have this division with security in defense and security in foreign affairs and so on. So I also have some kind of a task to spread this idea to some of my colleagues. Not all, because there are many of them, they are thinking in the way I do. But I think that if we, little by little, try to change the language, try to talk in another way, and connecting it to what is happening around us. For example, I spoke about the fires this year. Then that was a very good example. I spent the whole election campaign going out to talk about climate and security and link those two together, and to make people understand that this is our threat. We need a defense against that threat, not against Russia. Because Russia is the only enemy we ever had, you can say. But people, it takes time to change, to shift the ideas, but it's possible, because we have been able to change so many other ideas. Nobody believed us when we spoke about climate change 30 years ago. Nobody believed us, but we continue to speak about it. We continue to say this is real and it will be here. So I think that we have to never step back from our ideas and just continue, and with a lot of patience.
Yeah. So you're advocating for the inclusion of the clear inclusion of security matters as home affairs matters, rather than leaving them to the defense committee and others, and that's already, I mean, I do agree with you, and that would be already an achievement. But then I move to David, and then one last question, and then I'll open to participants. Please, David.
Yes, thank you. Yes, both of you made very excellent points, which I agree. I as an eco-socialist, I see a Green New Deal and a global Green New Deal as being actually an opportunity to end the rule of capital on our planet, to move beyond capitalism to a new civilization where it's based on human needs and nature needs, and not profit being at the forefront of an economy. So, and the leverage I think that Greens and socialists and so on have here is to dissolve the military-industrial complex, and even in a transition, use sectors of capital who are investing in clean energy, but not be naive that green capital is going to deliver us salvation. We need to constantly be aware of a protection regime and implement a protection regime for humans, for communities, and so forth, and nature itself in this transition. So when we talk about degrowth, what should grow and what shouldn't? This was really the theme of our panel at Malmo. What should grow and what shouldn't grow? I would submit that we should degrow the military-industrial complex and grow a new economy that addresses the needs of people and nature. And essential to this is to end the reliance on fossil fuel and fission power. I'm going to be provocative and say I support nuclear power, but only the safe nuclear power that's 93 million miles away. That's a fusion reactor in our sun. That's a nuclear reaction which is safe. And that is delivering us copious amounts of energy that we can use for our society. And so that's my take on this question. We need to deconstruct what is meant by degrowth. And so I am critical of the degrowth discourse. And of course, many in the discourse do recognize what I'm saying. So but we need to be conscious of how these words are taken, how these slogans are taken by people in different countries. When you say degrow, many working class folk would say, well, what am I going to do? Will I have a job? And so on. So we need to be very clear about the words we use, as Valero pointed out. And finally, on the issue that Dieng pointed to, and I have written about this. It's a full discussion in our book. The energy poverty that most of humanity suffers, not only in the global south, but even pockets of the global north. And this is very much linked to life expectancy. How much energy does a society have as a whole? This is a key criteria of what the quality of life is in the world. And of course, we can't supply that energy by the unsustainable sources that we're using now. So we need to implement a rapid transition to wind and solar under a strong protection regime, of course. And secondly, we need to change our agriculture to more ecological, sustainable agriculture. You can call it agroecologies. And thirdly, we need to demilitarize, because this transition will not be invention.
Thanks, David. Yeah, before I give, I see with Kelly and the participants whether there are other questions. I think we've touched a lot of points. Obviously, there's a big difference, as we know, from practicing politics between the way to get to the goal and the goals. And those in office know that the hard way sometimes. But I wanted to touch on two last points. There's one that I think is very worrisome for any of the discussion that we have, just because talking about any steady state, not even degrowth, but steady state of militarism and the reconversion of defense industry would involve multilateralism and diplomacy. The problem is that what we see is quite to the contrary, a revival of nationalism and the defense of those very industries in each of the pockets that are rearming or at least flexing their muscles to show that they are protecting themselves against a completely idealized threat, as Bodil mentioned. I mean, it's very unlikely, and it's certainly more unlikely than climate change. So I wanted to have your take, the three of you, especially Bodil, seen from the European Parliament and the EU as an actor in terms of multilateralism. This is a big problem today, is that there's a sort of not death of multilateralism, but there is definitely it's been halting in the last years, given the resurgence of certain actors, China, Russia, and certainly the take of the US here. And talking about that, I wanted to take that concrete example of arms exports, because that links what the three of you have been mentioning. I mean, we're talking about arms and weapons that are just finding their way somewhere. It is completely uncontrollable, untraceable in many cases, at least until it gets to the on the ground. And we are talking there about a very profitable industry, for which we have just published an interview of an NGO based in London campaigning against arms trade, for which all data shows that the employment argument is very weak. We're talking in many countries about very few people as part of the national or global workforce that are in the defense industry. So the employment argument is also a relatively fallacious one. So if I can hear you on that, arms export definitely for Bodil, but the question of how do we do that in a very difficult times for multilateralism, and that draws also on what Professor Dieng said, and I was very intrigued by what you meant about anti-globalization, because I mean the anti-globalization is certainly one thing that the Greens have pushed in a certain way. I mean the neoliberal globalization, but at the same time it is also something that is being pushed by the worst forces of all today, some of them being very authoritarian, populist, and first and foremost by President Trump today. So if I can hear you for 2-3 minutes each of you, and then we'll take a few questions. We'll go a bit longer for this webinar, and then we'll close. Thank you. Bodil?
Okay, I take the one on export, I suppose. To start with, the common position is it's not allowed to export arms based on employment, because this is a lot of well, otherwise you will lose the employments there, or the jobs. This is not allowed according to Article 10 in the common position. So that is ruled out, but that is the argument that we often hear, very often, and it's not okay, really. What we see now, or you spoke about what the Greens have done. We have, for many years, we have been talking about pooling and sharing, instead of that every single member state would rearm themselves or arm themselves. We have said we can use our capacities together and in that way reduce the total amount of weapons in Europe. And we got some of it through a couple of years ago, but now in this moment, when Commission has said, well, we can save 25 to 100 billion euros annually just by cooperating more, because we have such an overcapacity of arms in the European Union. So this we can save. But the way to do it is now to give more money so we can do more research together. Because as the countries, they didn't do what they should with the pooling and sharing. Now we give them more money so they might maybe cooperate more and find ways to do something together and so on. But when it comes to and this, we are totally against it, of course. But when it comes to the thing you mentioned in the beginning, we have more and more authoritarian states around us. We have more and more authoritarian regimes inside Europe, and more populism and nationalism, and we see it with Trump, and we see it everywhere. And I think we are in a very dangerous situation in the world just now, where we have left the solidarity, we have left the idea of doing things together. And if we don't stop this development in this area, I think it's very dangerous. In Europe, it's very clear we have a big problem.
Okay, thank you. David, and then Professor Dieng, before we see if there are other questions.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I see on this issue of arms export, I would point to the imperial axis of my own country, the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Of course, the US is a big arms exporter, but so is Israel, by the way. And this axis, which destabilizes peace, which inflicts untold misery and suffering on the peoples of the Middle East. I would point to Yemen. I would point to the sufferings of the Palestinian people under occupation. This is, to me, for the Green Party of the United States, this is one of our highest priorities, to address this and to terminate this imperial agenda. But let me praise the Europeans for defying the Trump regime in regards to Iran. And Bolton just threatened Europe with all kinds of crazy talk, and the Europeans say, no, we're keeping the nuclear agreement with Iran, and we're going to defy any sanctions on economic relationships with Iran. I think this is a very important development, and I see a more multipolar world emerging where the imperial agenda is increasingly challenged. And I'm not suggesting that Russia or China doesn't have their own issues too. So I would say, as an eco-socialist, that class struggle under all dimensions is necessary in all these countries, including China and Russia. But we should recognize some of the good developments that are coming out. So that's my comment on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Professor Dieng, to close?
Yes, no, quickly. What we have to consider is that power is not between the hand of politics. Power is between the hand of business activities. I mean, banks and industries. And talking about multilateralism is an UN agenda, but warm exportation is between the hand of firms. What happened right now all around the world? There is a kind of delocalization of weapons. So conventional weapons are right now in the South and in Latin America. You in Europe, you're developing new arm destruction with new technology. HARP is an example, and other example. So what happened? Industries, they localize, export arm in the South, but they not export, arm fabrication, arm production, not industries. What happened? You have this kind of inequity in the use of arm destruction. And this situation is a situation we live in according to what industries and the capital is looking as resource all around the globe, where the capital see, new resources, weapons are export. Look what's happening, in Syria, Libya, in this Maghreb world. Just the same shame we have happening in Africa. So those weapons are not, were not produced by we in the South, but from the North industry. And I think that it's really a dream, thinking that we can have what we call, arm reconversion. No, we have this kind of destruction, displace from a place to another place, running after profits. That's the situation of the globe right now, according to what they call, reconversion. And one thing I have to notice to finish, if we reflect, deeply, I think climate change will never be solved without solving these military activities. Because military activities is going with the use of energy. And this use of energy, what it is the use of, where you can have it. And you protect, countries where you have local elites defending your profit according to what your agenda is. That's the situation we're facing, we Greens. That's my input.
Thank you. We'll have soon to close. I just have one question for the three of you, but I'll direct it mainly to MEP Valero, to Bodil, given the turn of the question. I have here someone who's asking a broader question, but I think an important one in the discussion, especially forward-looking one. There has been a global trend of conservatives coming to power in major economies, and Standaert here from India mentions that now we see that within the EU, as you mentioned, even in Italy and in the recent elections in Sweden, and as I said, it's a broad question, so try to keep short the answer. Sorry for that, but it's why is such a trend happening globally? So why do we see that sort of backlash? I have my own take, but it would be way too long. So Bodil, if you can maybe answer the question from one of the participants.
I think it has to do with a growing sense of insecurity in some way that people feel. They don't recognize themselves in the world of today. I don't know really why it's like that. But the problem with all these right-wing governments that we have now is that they are restricting our fundamental rights, and we don't have any longer always an independent judiciary. So that we are losing a lot of rights and media freedom and so on. If we do not, that's why I said we are in a very dangerous situation now, and if we don't stop it very, very soon, it can be unstoppable, I think. So we have a lot to do, we Greens.
To unmute myself. If Professor Dieng and David, you want to have a very final short comment on that also, and then I will close.
Politically in many countries, because which the far right is filling because of the failure of neoliberal economics to address the challenges that we face. And we have to put together a broad political, let's say, a political coalition to meet that challenge. And I'm optimistic that this is going to happen. Let me just mention the United States. Since the 2016 election, the organization called the Democratic Socialists of America, which I always thought was too moderate for me, but not anymore. It's now over 50,000 members. and I joined after the 2016 election. So there is a resurgence of the left and reflecting on the problems of, quote, real existing socialism in the 20th century. We have to reinvent and reconceptualize what socialism means in the 21st century. And central to this is putting the challenge of preventing catastrophic climate change and war, particularly nuclear war, at the front. So that's my final comment.
Thank you, David. And we'll close with Professor Dieng, if you feel like. Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself. I can't hear you. Your mic is off.
Okay, my mic is on now. Okay?
Yes, it is on. Please.
Okay. So I get just to finish and try to focus on who supports the burden of environmental degradation as a consequence of, militarism. Who those people are. We have to, everybody know who support, the burden of environmental degradation caused by militarism. Poor people, and those people are people of color and people in the global south. What we need, what we need and what we have to do, I think that we have to support, we green, this new concept of ecocide developed by this French, academic. And this new concept of ecocide, we have to promote it. And it will not be for us, but for the next generation. How next generation can sue those who really, are at the base of this kind of weakness all around the world, using, this militarism activities to destroy or to hang on resources. And we have to support this. We have to be in connection with others and see how to join. So that's my point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dieng. Thank you to the three of you and to the participants for all the inputs, questions and topics. I think it's very hard to wrap up such a topic. I mean, we're talking about centuries long of capitalism and militarism. But if I had to, I think it was very constructive also in the sense that we come from very different backgrounds and theories of security situations, as we pointed out, even within Europe, as Bodil mentioned, but then certainly in different parts of the world. But beyond that, I think if I had to sum up, I think the issue of human security and trying to see what are the real threats to the lives of people, rather than the ones that are the very part and parcel of the defense industry narrative, is really something that is a sort of running thread across your interventions. And that the issue definitely then of growth, or what could be the alternative, and there are many discussions to be had on the Green New Deal, degrowth, post-growth, where are we going? But at least there is an avenue for discussion. Was very constructive. I think there's much more to say. I mean, if I think only of our work at the Green European Journal, we had 18 articles, and we are just a Green European Journal trying to tackle security from its many angles, because we haven't touched upon other aspects of security, which we should be talking about as Greens: food, technical security, cyber security, and others, which are very key. So I think around the human security, and I don't mean by that only the sort of UN mantra of human security, but beyond that, what I think Bodil alluded to at the beginning, and then Professor Dieng built upon. I think that is something that we have seen throughout the discussion. I'll see with the administration and convener of the Global Greens, but I'd be very interested to go into more depth on one particular topic regarding the security issue. And if I were to choose, I definitely would tackle the arms export one in terms of the defense industry, because I think it's a very practical, very tangible and human related. We're talking about workers, we're talking about people living livelihoods around, and that ties very much with the global picture, because I mean the defense industry, as Professor Dieng said, is part of that extractivist, or at least resource grabbing complex. I'll stop there. I hope it was interesting and fruitful discussion for all of you, and I hope to see you around for other webinars, seminars, or physical meetings, hopefully around. Thank you so much. I give the last word for closing to Kelly, and thanks very much to the three speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. My only closing is that I welcome ongoing discussion on the subject. Please, you can have that on our Facebook page. You're welcome to use it, and propose what topics you think we should hold on this series or on another subject as well. I'm very happy to convene these spaces as often as you'd like to have them. So that's all for next steps. Let's stay in contact and keep working together. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll close the meeting now.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.